Welcome back to Buckeye Talk, another Buckeye Retalkables. Doug Maurice, Nathan Barrett, Stephen Means, and we are doing 2016 Ohio State, Michigan. And guys, I don't even know if I filled out my category sheet on this one. We have been doing Retalkables for a long time now. We have a format, we have a way of doing things. But Nathan, in rewatching this game, this Ohio State double overtime victory in the shoe, in a 2-3 matchup between the Buckeyes and the Wolverines, I was so gobsmacked by the main thing that I thought that I set the categories on fire. So we'll go through them, but I want to know, Nathan, were you gobsmacked when you watched this game? And then maybe we'll just say, were you gobsmacked or not? And then we'll say, if you were gobsmacked, what gobsmacked you?
Slightly. I was at least like glancing blowed. I don't know if he got the actual full smack, but yes. I'll just say yes.
Okay.
There was something about this that yes.
You watched it and you felt a little something and you formed kind of an opinion, maybe kind of quickly.
Yes.
That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like kind of like Steven, any gobsmacking going in the Means household there?
A lot of gobsmacking. This is I think the fourth Michigan game, Ohio State Michigan game we've done of these, and it's the third one where I think in my head it was romanticized, and then you go back and we watch it, and it's nothing like what was going on in your head. But this is the worst of those three.
So here's the opinion that I formed like basically immediately and never wavered the entire game. This is part of why we are doing this. The 2016 Ohio State-Michigan game was a matchup of number 2 Ohio State and number 3 Michigan. The 2022 Ohio State-Michigan game was a matchup of number 2 Ohio State and number 3 Michigan. And basically the only opinion I formed in watching this game is that 2022 Ohio State and Michigan would beat the snot out of 2016 Ohio State and Michigan. This 2016 game has more in common with the Woody Hayes game from the early 60s than it does with what Ohio State Michigan is now. And if we are romanticizing, your word, Stephen. Oh, Urban was 7-0. Oh, the Buckeyes knew how to beat Michigan back then. Michigan had no idea what it was doing. It had no idea how to win. It had no talent. It handed a win to Ohio State that Ohio State tried its hardest not to take. And when you think about the way these teams play right now, the talent, especially offensively, on the field, the way they execute now, if we are going to look back and say, well, I don't know, current Ohio State needs to be more like this Ohio State, dear God, please no. Stephen, this is not what anybody wants Ohio State to be on the last Saturday in November or any other time. I would make 2022 versions of those two teams 17-point favorites over the 2016 versions of those two teams, and I don't think anybody who watched the game could think otherwise.
There's a lot of things about both of these teams that I absolutely hated, and they're both on the offensive side. There was a point at halftime when they're showing the stats, and they're like stats where it's Ohio State would have those in 2 drives now offensively, and Kirk Herbstreit had it. He made a point. He said first of all, he said the passing game has been the thing that's been holding Ohio State back all season, which is hilarious because you would never say that today. In fact, you'd say the polar opposite. The passing game is the only thing keeping Ohio State in the game. But he said they had only thrown one pass that was further than 15 yards. Everything was horizontal, and JT Barrett left, JT Barrett right. And Michigan was even worse because their talent didn't even have names of guys. This was ugly to watch, and I was really frustrated up until the first overtime happened, where basically all the action happened, and all of a sudden both of these teams figured out how to score points.
Nathan, Ohio State had 81 yards in the first half. It was a display as reasonably frustrated as Ohio State fans are by losing the last 2 games to Michigan. this was a display of incompetence in the Michigan game for a good 51 minutes that seems almost intolerable. It is dumbfounding to watch. Ohio State can't do anything. They are the number 2 team in the country. They are at home against Michigan. And again, this is primarily discussion for the moment. I think about the two offenses. It's not even, Nathan, like, oh, the mistakes that Ohio State made. It's that they can't do anything. There's nothing there. And that's what they're putting out into the world as the number 2 team in the country in the Michigan game.
It's not as if there's no talent on the field. Curtis Samuel, very good football player, has gone on to do things in the NFL. Paris Campbell, very good football player. I mean, there's guys out there that know what they're doing, have the talent. But you're right. It just seems from it's from an identity standpoint, something's off. And I actually think this is a historic edition of the game, because I think it might end up being the game where there was not at least one NFL quarterback on the field for those teams. Because the next year, Haskins has to come in and save Ohio State in 2017. Obviously, he's the quarterback again in 18. Then we're just talking about the Ohio State side of things, Fields, Stroud, and who comes next for Ohio State. You've obviously, Michigan has figured some things out now in the last couple of years from a quarterback standpoint. So that's almost like the portal. Maybe this is like the portal game between what the Big Ten was and what it's going to be now that Ohio State and Michigan are treating the quarterback position the way that they are.
It's also the last Michigan game Ryan Day wasn't here for, which,
right.
this is part of the reason you go get him, because the very next time this game is played in Columbus, Ohio State doubled its point total. Literally. Doubled it. All because you made some changes to the offensive coaching staff after this season, because you go from this to not making the Big Ten championship game to getting blown out by Clemson and not scoring a point. You bring in Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson, and all of a sudden you're on the path to have potentially the best offenses in the country for the next 5-6 years.
The thing that is just a particularly worthwhile conversation, because it is such a direct comparison. It is 2016. It is 2022. It is only 6 years apart. Ohio State is number 2 in both games. Michigan is number 3 in both games. In 2016, Ohio State wins. In 2022, Michigan wins. But this is to inform, it's to remind the loyal, dedicated, educated Ohio State fans who are listening to this podcast. If we would use, look, 6 years ago, Ohio State found a way to win. Hey, 6 years ago, Ohio State got it done. Urban got it done. Those Buckeyes were tough. It's not. It's just not. Michigan gave it away. And I think when we think about this, of all the things that smacked me in the face and caused me to set my categories on fire, the number one thing I think, Nathan, is the competence and talent level of Michigan and how much that changes the equation here. Because you watch, in the end, they could have taken Jabril Peppers, who is a defensive player and a wildcat quarterback for Michigan in this game, and Curtis Samuel, who is the entire Ohio State offense, and had them play tag in the parking lot, and it would have been as effective as what this was. Because both those offenses had one guy who scared you in any way. And 6 years later, Nathan, Blake Corum's not even in the game, but Donovan Edwards is destroying people. For everything, Cornelius Johnson isn't a world beater or whatever. Michigan did not throw the ball to a person who could have done what Cornelius Johnson did in the game last year. And then the Ohio State comparison, it's not even worth making a comparison. I'm not so sure Chip Trainum wouldn't have been the second best Ohio State offensive player in this game behind Curtis Samuel. That idea, but it is Michigan. And I will say I did look some stuff up. I wrote before this game and making my pick, and I ended up picking Wilton Spate, who looks like he's throwing a medicine ball the whole game. The Michigan quarterback, he looks like he's from the 30s. And the whole thing going into the game is like, starting Michigan quarterback Wilton Spate might be hurt and might not be able to play. And in my prediction, I said, I'm not sure if Wilton Spade's going to be able to play. That's going to hurt Michigan. If he can play, Michigan's got a chance. And then he did play. But I picked I picked Ohio State 27-24 while acknowledging this really was it for Michigan. I wrote, this has to be Michigan's time in the rivalry. That was the lead to my pick, Nathan, because Michigan, in the moment, it felt like Michigan had a lot going for it. They were really veteran. I think they were good in the trenches. They had Rashawn Gary. They had Jabril Peppers, that kind of stuff, Nathan. But I think when you compare that Michigan team to what Michigan is now, to what Michigan has been the last 2 years, there's no Aiden Hutchinson on that field. There's no Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards combo on that field. Right? That kind of thing. Michigan has come so far. And on the thing I think we could take away is that's what number 2 and 3 in the country representing the Big Ten looked like back then. This is what it looks like now. The Big Ten's gotten better. Now, Ohio State, Michigan, those teams, that's an Ohio State team that's number 2 in the country that's about to get destroyed by Clemson. Now, in 2022, that was a number 2 Ohio State team that played Michigan that hung with Georgia to the last second. That, I think, is an encapsulation, and Michigan's the same way. They're number 2, they're number 3. Both programs are so much better now. But, Nathan, how to win, talent level, competence, get out of your own way, don't give the game away. That part of Michigan is night and day. And you have to acknowledge that as we try to analyze this, because this Michigan team that you watch, not to only reference myself, but I did cover the game. My headline off the game was Michigan was better, but Ohio State won. I think Michigan's the better team in this game. Yet, Michigan 6 years later is also still significantly better than what that Michigan was. It's just Michigan didn't know what to do, Nathan. They didn't know how to play winning football, at least not in the rivalry.
Yeah, and this really was, I thought, a microcosm of one of the big criticisms of the early part of the Harbaugh era. Now, he's only a couple years in at this point, but he's a quarterback. He had developed quarterbacks in the past.
Yep, you're 2.
Yeah, he developed quarterbacks in the past. So you might not expect him to have a stud in place already at this point of his career. Wilton Spate, I was trying to, this wasn't a game that this was before I was covering Ohio State, obviously, by a few years. So it wasn't a game that I have great memory of. But I'm watching Wilton Spate pass, and I'm trying to think, like, what is that? Sure. What does that remind me of? Like, what is that hitch that he has? And I finally, do you know what a trebuchet is? Doug, you probably know what a trebuchet is with your knowledge of French medieval siege tactics. Stephen may be less likely. So it's basically like it's sort of a catapult.
Maybe less likely.
It's like a little. Okay. It's like a catapult.
I am not familiar.
It's a tall structure, usually on like wheels or whatever. They could move it around, and it basically it's like there's a counterweight, and it has a long arm, and then like this strap underneath it that you put a rock in or whatever, and you release the weight, and it whips it around and flings it downfield. Somebody go on YouTube and look at what a trebuchet is, and a trebuchet in action, and then go watch Wilton Spate throw a football, and it's the same thing. And I think what is probably was distressing it for this rivalry then is that you're like, okay, 2016, that's the best they could do. But Harbaugh didn't figure quarterback out for like another 5 years. I mean, Cade McNamara quarterbacking Michigan in this game, 2016 game, changes everything. I think Michigan wins this game by 4 touchdowns.
Cade McNamara, who couldn't hold off J.J. McCarthy. Right. Like Cade McNamara, who wasn't good enough to be the starting quarterback for Michigan last year, wins this game. This is Michigan. Stephen, did you think Michigan was better? As you watched this game, did you think to yourself, oh, man, Michigan should have won this game?
Yeah. Especially, it's not even because they were up by a decent amount of points, which, given how these offenses played, you could probably call that a significant amount of points. I thought Michigan was just a better football team because Ohio State's entire offense was, we have to find a way to get Curtis Samuel the ball, and if we don't know what to do.
And they didn't get Curtis Samuel the ball like until overtime. Right. Curtis Samuel in this game only wound up with, let's see, he had He had 11 touches the whole game. He's the whole offense. JT Barrett runs the ball 30 times in this game. Is that possible? This is
I watched
so
well.
bad.
Well,
This is so bad.
But 22 actual runs and a lot of scrambles because he got sacked 8 times because Isaiah Prince could just like not hold his own on that right tackle spot. It was
That's
so
right.
bad to the point that I'm thinking at times, why don't they pull him? It's like, oh wait, that's why they don't pull him. He's still their best option, even if he's not very good.
By the way, if we're worried about if the tackle spots don't get figured out in 2023, what it might look like, go watch Isaiah Prince try to play in the 2016 Michigan game and watch him, like, his ineptitude single-handedly blow up the Ohio State offense half the time. Like that. It's like, oh, what could bad tackle play do to you? This. Like this. It can do this to you. They have the play in overtime, in the second overtime. It's a 3rd and 9 play. They're down 3 in the second overtime. They have to kick a field goal to stay tied, or the touchdown to win. They throw a swing pass, Nathan, to Curtis Samuel in the flat with nothing. There's a linebacker screaming at him at 100 miles an hour. There are 2 guys trying to make blocks down the field. It's their 3rd and 9 do or die play. And it becomes the play where Curtis Samuel runs around like a maniac and gets 8 3/4 yards that sets up the 4th down JT Barrett play when he hits AJ Alexander in the butt, and we'll get to that later. But like that was the play call, Nathan. That moment was like, hey, it's 3rd and 9. What are you going to do? And that is what it is. We are eons past that offensively for Ohio State right now. And it's just ineptitude. It's Ed Warner, it's Tim Beck, it's Urban Meyer. Like, this is the best we got. It's JT Barrett. This is the best we got. JT Barrett throwing the ball is awful in this game. And now it's like, it sounds like we're mad at Ohio State. It's like that we're mad at 2016 Ohio State. I know it sounds like that. I think, Stephen, you used the exact right word off the bat. I think we are mad at the idea of anyone romanticizing this and thinking now what Ohio State needs is more of that. And we are here to tell you it's no. Nathan, that 3rd and 9 play, it's vile. It's Curtis Samuel all by himself because nobody on the offensive staff, nobody on the offensive line, the quarterback, no other receivers. They couldn't think of anything else to do. And so they said, here, Curtis Samuel, save us. And he did. And they wind up winning the game as a result. If he just gets tackled by the linebacker there for like a 3-yard loss, which is what should have happened, setting up a 4th and 12 for the game, that play call becomes like a symbol of the end of the most inept Ohio State offensive era since, the early 60s or something. It blows your mind, Nathan.
So you and I recently recorded a podcast about Ryan Day and our the confidence in him now and the evolution that he's been undergoing. And if you think about 2016 Urban Meyer, he has 3 national championships in his back pocket. Now, one with a unique quarterback situation, but the first 2 won with a not NFL elite passer type of quarterback, a more like JT Barrett type quarterback in what Tim Tebow was, and more just a football player first who plays quarterback, and an excellent football player. And I want to make sure that JT Barrett is considered an excellent football player because he was. But this is a little bit of
not
a
in this game, but in his life,
in general,
in this game,
in general, and in and you would have a better perspective on this, but this game coupled with then what happens against Clemson, and especially what happens against Clemson led by Deshaun Watson, had to be such an eye opener for Urban Meyer. And we sort of quibbled. I was talking to you about the difference between evolution and kind of being pushed into a corner and having to adapt. And maybe that's what's happened with Ryan Day on a couple of things, and having to just make a change. But I would give Urban Meyer some credit here for doing what he did to go get Ryan Day to both change the thought process of the offense, change the way that you think about calling plays and setting up an offense, and also the kind of quarterback you were going to then produce and cultivate. I mean, because then now you already have Joe Burrow and Dwayne Haskins in your program, developing them ready to take that next step. And this game is, again, it's like it's two sides of it's the Stargate or whatever, right? You're like on one side, you're in the previous. This is as far as you could walk in the previous version of Ohio State football history. It kind of goes to the conversation, the pod we recently did about the national championship conversation, because it's almost, even though Meyer had already won his national championship at Ohio State, it's this game, the changes that happen after this game, bringing Ryan Day on, and the way that now they recruit the most important position and develop it in the world, in the game, that almost is what changes the expectations of how often that should happen, because it's a big leap forward into modern football for Ohio State. They could have gotten caught up. They could have not pulled the trigger on this. They could have gone for they could have doubled down on what they were, on what their identity was. But I think Urban Meyer, for all the criticisms that you might level against him, and I've certainly leveled some, I think he deserves credit from a football standpoint for setting the wheels in motion for what Ohio State is now.
But I think what's crazy about that is the evolution is already on the roster. They just needed someone better to guide it. Like Dwayne Haskins and Joe Burrow are here already. Dwayne's a true freshman. Joe Burrow's is a second-year guy here, a redshirt freshman at this point. Terry McLaurin and Perry, the guys who, like Joe Burrow, the number one pick in all that, but the guys who were part of the real change in 2018 in that passing attack are already here. With Dwayne Haskins and Terry McLaurin and Paris Campbell and Johnny Dixon and KJ Harrell, they're just younger and in the background and not ready to do it yet, but they also don't have the coaches in place ready to guide that in the right direction.
It does make me feel better about thinking Tim Beck is terrible. I just would like to say that there. Sometimes I think, well, I don't know. Then he went to North Carolina State. Now he's the head coach at Coastal Carolina. Nope. Terrible. This is his quarterback. This is his second year being the quarterback's coach, and JT Barrett can't throw a slant. And the conversation, like, you're being very nice to JT Barrett. JT Barrett is a fine fella. He's a great Buckeye. If you're trying to figure out, remember how, like, we used to talk a lot about, like, man, I don't know, like, Ohio State fans, do they love JT Barrett? Are they sick of JT Barrett? Whatever. It's like, oh, this. Okay, sorry. Forgot about this. It's like, this is not functional. This is not functional football. Their whole offense at the end of the game is a quarterback draw because they can't do anything else, or let the offensive line get beat, hold the ball, scramble, because there's no functional passing offense. Actual receivers have 6 catches in this game for Ohio State. JT Barrett overall is 15 of 32 for 124 yards with 8 sacks and a pick. No touchdowns. The actual receivers, Noah Brown, 3 for 40. KJ Hill, 2 for 19. Dontre Wilson, 1 for 9. Steven, I'm done. I'm leaving. Finish it up. I can't do it. Who would us to relive this? Back in Urban used to beat Michigan. What's wrong with that? This is awful. Sorry, it's nobody's fault. Congratulations, they won. This is awful. Steven, it's awful. This is non-functional, incompetent offensive football. Tim Beck is terrible. Oh, say it. Let it out. Tim Beck is terrible at his job. It feels good. I was right all along. I knew it. I was right. He stinks. This is awful. What is this? Steven, Urban falls to the ground at the end of this game. It's like Urban collapses on the ground. I wanted to collapse. What was this, Steven? I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. Tim Beck is terrible at his job. This is awful. Steven, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm not sure who did a bigger disservice to Ohio State in the development of pretty talented players between Tim Beck and Bill Davis at this point, because I'm pretty sure, because at least Bill Davis, we never really got a chance to see the best of Baron Browning. So he just broke Baron Browning and the rest of these linebackers from day one. JT Barrett was like on a Heisman Trophy trajectory.
Yeah.
And then, like, Tim Beck came in. Tim Beck broke JT Barrett, and he never recovered. And let me tell you why. Because then Ryan Day came in. And the thing is, I paired with this game, I went and watched Ryan Day interviews from the following spring, and every question was a different variation of, hey, how are you going to fix JT Barrett? And Ryan Day's trying to find nice ways to go, listen, I don't know if I can fix him. I think he is what it is, because this is as bad as JT Barrett was this day. This is also not the worst game of his career. That would come a year later against Iowa when he opens the game with a pick six. So it's like it's not like, oh, he bottomed out and now it's only up from here. There's another step lower that JT can go, and it comes back to Tim Beck broke JT. And I'm not saying JT Barrett would be a first-round draft pick NFL player, even a second-round draft pick NFL player right now. But I think he would have been draftable the way his career kind of started here at Ohio State. And then you brought in Tim Beck, and it broke him, and he never recovered.
I'm going to send this podcast to Ed Warner. He's Tim. He's Ed. Together they don't know what to do. They can't call any plays. He's Tim and he's Ed. They're awful.